The silence in the grand ballroom wasn't one of reverence. It was the sharp, breathless hush that precedes a detonation. Hundreds of the city's elite, draped in diamonds and tailored suits, held their champagne flutes suspended in mid-air. All eyes were on the stage, where billionaire Alistair Williams had just finished a toast. But he hadn't toasted his wife Meredith, who stood beside him. He had toasted his mistress. And now, as the humiliation settled like a physical weight on her shoulders, Meredith reached for the microphone. Her hand didn't tremble. Her voice, when it came, was not a whisper of defeat, but the clear, cutting sound of a blade being drawn. The Williams residence in the heart of Mayfair was less a home and more a museum of a life Meredith Williams no longer felt she was living. It was a place of polished marble floors that echoed with loneliness and floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked a city she felt disconnected from. For 10 years, she had been the silent, steady architect of her husband Alistair's success. It was her sharp business acumen, inherited from her unassuming accountant father, that had helped turn Alistair's fledgling tech startup into the global behemoth Williams Innovations. She had been the one poring over contracts while he charmed investors, the one balancing budgets while he graced magazine covers. But in the last 2 years, something had shifted. The man who once called her his secret weapon now called her his social liability. Alistair, sculpted by expensive tailors and inflated by public adoration, had grown ashamed of her quiet nature and simple elegance. He craved a woman who was an accessory, a dazzling jewel to hang on his arm, not a partner who knew the company's foundational code better than he did. The upcoming Starlight Foundation charity gala was the focal point of Alistair's current obsession. It was the social event of the season, a night where fortunes were pledged and reputations were cemented. For weeks, the house had been a whirlwind of Alistair's preparations. Stylists, publicists, and event coordinators moved through the rooms like an invading army, their hushed, urgent conversations a constant reminder of Meredith's exclusion. "Meredith, for God's sake, are you really planning on wearing that?" Alistair's voice, sharp with disdain, cut through the quiet of her walk-in closet. She looked down at the dress. She held a timeless, elegant navy blue gown by a classic designer. "I thought it was understated," she replied, her voice soft. He scoffed, a sound that had become painfully familiar. He was already in his tuxedo, looking like a king, surveying a particularly disappointing part of his kingdom. "Understated is another word for forgettable. This is the Starlight Gala, not a PTA meeting. I need you to look impactful." He gestured vaguely. "I've had a few options from Valentino sent over. My assistant Isabella picked them out. She has an impeccable eye." The name landed like a stone in the pit of her stomach. Isabella Vance, the new executive assistant who had been hired 6 months ago. She was everything Meredith was not: vibrant, overtly ambitious, with a laugh that echoed in boardrooms and a scent of expensive Parisian perfume that lingered in Alistair's car. Meredith had tried to be welcoming, but Isabella had looked at her with an unnerving mixture of pity and triumph. Later that evening, while looking for a misplaced folder in Alistair's home office, Meredith found the first concrete piece of evidence. It was a credit card statement, carelessly left on the mahogany desk. Tucked between charges for 5-star restaurants she hadn't been to and flights to cities they hadn't visited together was a recurring charge that made her blood run cold: a monthly rental payment for a luxury apartment in Knightsbridge, an apartment Meredith had never seen, and next to it, a charge for a diamond necklace from a boutique called Elysian Jewels, purchased just last week. It certainly wasn't her anniversary. Her heart hammered against her ribs. It was one thing to feel the emotional distance, to see the dismissive glances. It was another to hold the cold, hard proof of betrayal in her hands. The numbers on the page weren't just expenses. They were a detailed accounting of her marriage's slow and painful death. She remembered a conversation from a few nights ago. Alistair had come home late, smelling of that same Parisian perfume and a hint of champagne. He'd been distant, almost agitated. Long day, she had asked, trying to keep her voice even. "You have no idea," he'd snapped. "Closing the Henderson deal. It's draining." But the Henderson deal had been closed last month. She knew because she had drafted the final terms. The lie was so blatant, so lazy, it was more insulting than the truth would have been. Now, with the statement in her hand, the lazy lie became a calculated deception. He wasn't just cheating. He was building a separate life, funded by the IPA she had helped him create. A quiet fury, cold and clear, began to replace the hollow ache in her chest. For years she had quietly endured his growing ego, telling herself it was the price of his success. She had faded into the background, allowing him to take all the credit, because she loved the man he had been and believed he was still in there somewhere. But this document told her that man was gone. In his place was a stranger who saw her as an obstacle, a relic of a past he was desperate to shed. The humiliation stung, but for the first time in a long time, Meredith felt a flicker of her old self, the sharp, analytical woman who didn't just accept things at face value. She folded the statement, her movements precise, and slid it into her purse. Alistair wanted her to be impactful at the gala. A new dangerous idea began to form in her mind. Oh, she would be impactful, but not in the way he or his assistant could ever imagine. The next morning, Meredith didn't confront Alistair. An emotional outburst was exactly what he would expect. Tears, accusations, a scene he could easily dismiss as feminine hysteria. Instead, she channeled her pain into a cold, calculated strategy. She was a researcher at heart, a problem solver. Her marriage was a problem, and Isabella Vance was a variable she needed to understand completely. She contacted a man named Marcus Thorne, a discreet private investigator recommended to her years ago by a corporate lawyer. Marcus was a former MI6 agent, a quiet, unassuming man in his late 50s with eyes that missed nothing. They met in a small, anonymous coffee shop in a part of London Alistair would never visit. Mrs. Williams. Marcus began, his voice a low murmur. "You mentioned on the phone this was a matter of extreme sensitivity." Meredith pushed a file across the table. It contained a photo of Isabella she'd downloaded from the company website, the Knightsbridge address from the credit card statement, and the name of the jewelry boutique. "My husband is having an affair with this woman." His assistant, Isabella Vance Meredith, said, her voice steady and devoid of emotion. "I don't just want confirmation. I want to know everything about her. Where she comes from, her family, her education, her past relationships, everything." Marcus scanned the documents, his expression unreadable. People like this who attach themselves to wealth so quickly often have carefully curated histories. It's my job to find the pages they've torn out. I'll start with the apartment. For the next week, Meredith lived a double life. To Alistair, she was the same quiet, compliant wife, even feigning interest in the Valentino gowns he'd had sent over. She chose the most dramatic one, a blood-red creation that was completely unlike her usual style, and told him she would wear it to please him. His smug satisfaction was almost unbearable, but she held her composure, viewing it as an actress preparing for a role. Internally, she was a nerve center of anxiety and anticipation, waiting for Marcus's call. It came late one rainy Tuesday afternoon. Meredith, he said, foregoing the formality of her married name. We have a problem. Isabella Vance doesn't exist. The words hung in the air, chilling her to the bone. What do you mean, she doesn't exist? I mean, the person you know as Isabella Vance is a ghost, Marcus explained. The social security number she provided to your husband's company is fake. The university degree from the Sorbonne she claims to have, the university has no record of her. The prestigious family from Geneva she talks about. They don't exist. She's a complete fabrication. Meredith sank onto a chair in her study, the room where she'd spent thousands of hours building Alistair's company. A fabrication. The woman who was dismantling her life wasn't even real. So who is she? Meredith whispered. That's what I've been working on. Marcus said. I ran facial recognition against multiple databases using surveillance photos I took outside the Knightsbridge flat. I got a hit, a low-quality one from a 5-year-old fraud case in Miami, Florida. He sent the file to her encrypted email address. Meredith opened it, her hands trembling. The mugshot on the screen showed a younger, harder-looking version of Isabella. Her hair was different, her expression defiant, but the eyes were the same, cold and calculating. And the name beneath the photo was not Isabella Vance. It was Catherine O'Malley. Catherine Kitty O'Malley. Marcus's voice continued over the phone. She was part of a ring that specialized in romance scams, targeting wealthy, middle-aged businessmen. She was charged, but the key witness had a sudden change of heart after an alleged threat, and the case was dropped. After that, she vanished. It seems she came to Europe to find bigger fish. Meredith stared at the screen, a dizzying wave of emotions washing over her. The betrayal was deeper, darker than she could have imagined. Alistair wasn't just having an affair with a younger woman. He had been targeted and ensnared by a professional con artist. He had staked his reputation, his company's security, and his marriage on a woman who was a complete lie. He had brought a viper into their home, into the heart of their empire, and mocked Meredith while doing it. There's more, Marcus said, his tone grim. The jewelry. Elysian Jewels isn't just any boutique. It's known in certain circles as a place to quickly and quietly liquidate assets. She wasn't buying jewelry with your husband's money. She was likely having him buy it for her, then selling it back for cash at a slight loss. And the Knightsbridge apartment. The lease is ending in 2 months. My guess is she was planning her exit strategy. Once she secured what she wanted, perhaps a significant financial settlement or access to sensitive company information, she would disappear, just like she did in Miami. The pieces of the puzzle clicked into place with horrifying clarity. Isabella's ambition wasn't just to be the new Mrs. Williams. It was to bleed Alistair dry and vanish, leaving him ruined. And Alistair, blinded by his own ego and lust, was handing her the knife to do it. Meredith's grief and anger began to coalesce into a diamond-hard resolve. This was no longer just about a cheating husband. This was about protecting the legacy she had built. Alistair's humiliation of her was a symptom of his own blindness, a blindness that was now threatening to destroy everything. She closed the laptop. She now held a secret that could obliterate Isabella, or Catherine rather, and she knew exactly when and where she was going to reveal it. The Starlight Gala wasn't just a party anymore. It was going to be a courtroom, and she was going to be the prosecution. The blood-red Valentino dress hanging in her closet suddenly seemed fitting. It was the color of war. The 48 hours leading up to the gala were the most surreal of Meredith's life. She moved through her days with a strange, detached calm, the kind of stillness that settles over a battlefield before the first shot is fired. The knowledge she possessed was a physical weight, a dense, powerful core within her. It was a terrible burden and an incredible weapon. Alistair, oblivious, was at his absolute worst. He was preening, energized by the prospect of the gala. He saw it as his coronation, a public celebration of his success, with the beautiful Isabella watching from the wings and his dowdy wife fading ever further into the background. His cruelty became casual, delivered in offhand remarks that were designed to chip away at her last vestiges of self-worth. "Try to keep up tonight, Meredith," he said on the morning of the gala, not even looking up from the knot of his silk tie. "Mingle. Don't just stand in a corner counting the canapes. You need to at least look like you belong." "I'll do my best," she replied, her voice a placid sea belying the hurricane beneath. She had helped him secure half the donors on the event's guest list, but he had long forgotten that. "And for God's sake, let Isabella handle the introductions to the board members from Zurich. You get flustered with languages." He had forgotten that she was fluent in German and French, a skill that had been indispensable in their early European expansion. It was a deliberate, petty erasure of her contributions, of her very identity. The old Meredith would have felt a sting of pain. The new Meredith simply filed it away, another piece of evidence for the judgment to come. That afternoon, she met with Chloe, her closest friend, in a quiet park. Chloe was the only one who knew about the affair, though she didn't yet know the full extent of Meredith's discoveries. "Are you sure you want to go through with this tonight?" Chloe asked. Her brow furrowed with concern as she clutched Meredith's hand. "You could just leave him. Disappear. Start over. Leaving quietly would be a victory for them," Meredith said, her gaze fixed on the distant London skyline. "He would paint me as unstable emotional. She would become the victim who rescued him from a troubled marriage. No, the truth has to come out. Not just for me, but for the company. He's given her a high-level security clearance, Chloe. She has access to everything. This isn't just about my heart. It's about the life's work of hundreds of employees." Chloe squeezed her hand. "Then what's the plan? How are you going to do it?" "He's giving the keynote address tonight." Meredith explained her plan, now fully formed. "He'll be on stage in front of everyone. He loves the spotlight. So I'm going to let him have it. I'm going to let him build himself up as high as he can go. And then I'm going to pull the foundation out from under him." That evening, as she got ready, Meredith felt a transformation taking place. She wasn't just putting on a dress, she was donning armor. The blood-red Valentino gown was a statement. Her hair, usually in a simple, elegant chignon, was styled in soft, glamorous waves by a stylist Chloe had arranged, a woman who knew nothing of the night's drama, but sensed the steel in her client's demeanor. Her makeup was understated, but powerful, accentuating the fierce clarity in her eyes. When she descended the grand staircase, Alistair was waiting at the bottom, a glass of scotch in his hand. He stopped mid-sip, his eyes widening almost imperceptibly. For a fleeting moment he looked at her, not as the familiar boring wife, but as a striking woman he didn't quite recognize. "Well," he said, recovering quickly, a smirk playing on his lips. "It seems Isabella's choice was a good one. You almost look the part." It was meant to be a final cutting remark, a reminder that even her beauty tonight was not her own. But it didn't land. She simply smiled, a cool, enigmatic smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I'm so glad you approve, darling," she said. "We wouldn't want me to be forgettable tonight, would we?" In the car on the way to the Dorchester Hotel, where the gala was being held, the silence was thick with unspoken words. Alistair was scrolling through his phone, a self-satisfied smile on his face. Meredith knew he was texting Isabella, who would already be there networking, charming, playing the part of the brilliant, indispensable assistant. Meredith looked out the window at the glittering lights of London. She felt no fear, only a profound and terrible clarity. She was about to detonate a bomb in the middle of her own life, and the blast would destroy everything. Her marriage, Alistair's reputation, and a dangerous woman's elaborate web of lies. There would be no going back. And for the first time in years, that felt like freedom. The storm was no longer coming. She was the storm. The ballroom at the Dorchester was a dizzying spectacle of wealth and power. Crystal chandeliers the size of small cars cast a glittering golden light over a sea of London's most influential figures. The air hummed with conversation, the clinking of glasses and the soft strains of a string quartet. For a moment, stepping into the throng on Alistair's arm, Meredith felt a pang of nostalgia for the early days when nights like these had felt like a thrilling adventure they were conquering together. The feeling vanished the moment she saw Isabella. She was standing near the main stage, holding a small crowd captive, with a story her laughter bright and artificial. She wore a shimmering silver dress that clung to her like a second skin, a stark metallic contrast to Meredith's deep red. Their eyes met across the room. Isabella's smile didn't falter, but she gave Meredith a look of such blatant, triumphant condescension that it was practically a declaration of victory. It was the look of a predator who believed her prey was already defeated. Alistair immediately steered them in her direction. "Isabella, wonderful work with the seating arrangements. Everything is perfect." He gushed his hand, leaving Meredith's arm to rest for a moment too long on the small of Isabella's back. "Only the best for you." Alistair. Isabella purred, her eyes flicking to Meredith. "And Mrs. Williams, that dress is a bold choice. It's wonderful to see you trying new things." The compliment was expertly crafted to sound like an insult, a patronizing pat on the head. Meredith simply smiled, her cool, serene smile. "Thank you, Isabella. It's always important to be prepared for a memorable evening." For the next hour, Meredith played the part of the dutiful wife perfectly. She nodded, she smiled, she allowed Alistair to talk over her. She watched as he and Isabella operated like a well-oiled machine, moving through the crowd, charming donors and sharing inside jokes. They were a team. Meredith was the ghost haunting her own life. With every passing minute, the cold resolve in her heart hardened further. Finally, the time came. The lights dimmed, and the chairman of the Starlight Foundation took the stage to introduce the evening's keynote speaker and primary benefactor, Alistair Williams. Alistair strode onto the stage to thunderous applause. He was in his element, bathed in the spotlight radiating confidence and power. Meredith was expected to stand at the side of the stage, the supportive wife, smiling adoringly. And she did. She stood there, her expression unreadable as he began his speech. He spoke about innovation, about the future, about philanthropy. It was a good speech, polished and inspiring. And then he went off script. "Success is never achieved alone," he said, his voice resonating with false humility. He paused, looking out over the crowd. "I've been blessed with a team that pushes the boundaries of what's possible every single day." He then looked towards Isabella, who was watching from the front table, her face a mask of rapt attention. And in recent times he continued his gaze lingering on her. I've been particularly fortunate to have someone by my side whose vision and passion have been a true source of inspiration, someone who understands the dynamic world we live in. Thank you, Isabella, for bringing such clarity and light to William's innovations. The implication was crystal clear to everyone in the room who knew the whispers. It was a public anointment. Then, as if remembering an afterthought, he turned his head slightly towards Meredith. "And of course I must thank my wife, Meredith," he said, his tone shifting to one of indulgent condescension, "for holding down the fort at home, for her years of quiet support. It's so important to have that kind of stability. Please, a round of applause for her." The applause was hesitant, awkward. The room was thick with embarrassment on her behalf. It was the ultimate humiliation. In front of hundreds of their peers, colleagues, and friends, he had reduced their 10-year partnership to a footnote. He had dismissed her as the domestic, stable, boring foundation upon which his exciting new life was being built. He had publicly crowned his mistress and relegated his wife to the shadows with a dismissive pat on the head. He finished his speech and turned to her, a smug, triumphant smirk on his face, expecting her to shrink away, to perhaps even have tears in her eyes. The guests were looking at her, a sea of pitying faces. This was the moment, the detonation point. Alistair reached for her hand to lead her off stage, but Meredith didn't move. Instead, she stepped forward, moving past him towards the lectern, where the microphone still stood. "Alistair, wait," she said, her voice calm and clear, amplified throughout the silent ballroom. He froze, his smile faltering. "Meredith, what are you doing?" he hissed under his breath. She reached the lectern and gently adjusted the microphone. She looked out at the sea of faces, and for the first time they were all focused solely on her. The quiet, forgettable wife had taken center stage. "My husband is right," she began, her voice ringing with an authority no one in that room had ever heard from her before. "Honesty and clarity are so important in today's world, and he's right to thank those who bring new energy. In fact, his tribute to Ms. Vance has inspired me to offer my own." She turned her head and looked directly at Isabella, whose adoring smile was now frozen on her face, a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. "I think we should all give a truly warm welcome." Meredith continued, her words precise and deliberate. "Not just to Isabella Vance, the brilliant executive assistant from Geneva." She paused, letting the silence stretch, letting every single person in the room lean in, but also to Catherine O'Malley from Miami, Florida. A collective audible gasp swept through the ballroom. The name meant nothing to most but the context. The cold, deliberate way Meredith delivered it was electric. It was the sound of a guillotine blade being released. Isabella Catherine jerked as if struck. The color drained from her face, leaving behind a pallid mask of sheer panic. Her eyes, wide with terror, darted towards the exits. Alistair stared at Meredith, his face a canvas of confusion and fury. "Meredith, what the hell is this? Have you been drinking?" he snarled in a harsh whisper, trying to grab her arm. She moved away from his touch, never taking her eyes off the crowd. "I haven't been drinking, Alistair. I've been doing my due diligence. Something you as a CEO should appreciate." Her voice regained its amplified public tone. "You see, Catherine, or Kitty, as her associates in Miami knew her, has a truly remarkable history. She's not an alumnus of the Sorbonne. She has no prestigious Swiss family. Her real talent lies in asset liquidation and identity fraud. She specializes in targeting successful, but perhaps emotionally vulnerable. Businessmen. A low murmur erupted in the room, growing into a wave of shocked whispers. People were turning to stare at Isabella, who now looked like a cornered animal. The mask of sophistication had shattered, revealing the raw fear of a common criminal. Meredith continued her voice, methodical and relentless, laying out the facts as if presenting a quarterly report. Her standard procedure is quite effective. Fabricate a persona of elegance and intelligence, secure a position of trust, and then begin systematically siphoning funds through luxury goods which are then sold for untraceable cash. For example, a rather lovely diamond necklace purchased last week from Elysian Jewels was likely converted into a more portable form of currency just yesterday. She glanced at Alistair, whose face had gone from red with anger to a ghastly white. He was finally understanding. The adoration he thought he'd earned was a transaction. The passion was a performance. He hadn't been a king choosing a new queen. He had been a mark. She was charged with fraud 5 years ago. Meredith's voice cut through the noise, silencing the room once more. But the case was dropped when a key witness was intimidated into silence. It seems her associates are not just clever, they're dangerous. She let that hang in the air, a subtle threat that underscored the gravity of Alistair's recklessness. He hadn't just brought a mistress into their lives. He had exposed his company and his family to a criminal element. Every word was a perfectly aimed shot. Meredith wasn't yelling or crying. Her calm, factual dismantling of Isabella was 1,000 times more devastating. It was an execution, not a tantrum. She then delivered the final fatal blow. She looked directly at Mr. Harrison, the powerful conservative chairman of the board, a man for whom reputation and security were everything. Alistair, in his infatuation, she said the word, dripping with clinical precision, granted Ms. O'Malley Level 3 security clearance last month. This gave her unrestricted access to our company's intellectual property, our upcoming patents, and the personal financial data of every single one of our board members. The room erupted. The whispers turned into loud, horrified exclamations. Mr. Harrison's face was a stone mask of fury. This was no longer a marital spat. This was a catastrophic breach of corporate security, a scandal that could tank their stock price and trigger shareholder lawsuits. All eyes were now on Isabella. Her composure was completely gone. With a strangled squawk, she turned and fled. She pushed past a stunned waiter, sending a tray of glasses crashing to the floor, and ran from the ballroom, the sound of her silver heels on the marble floor, the only sound in the stunned silence that followed. Meredith looked at her husband. He stood frozen on the stage, the spotlight that he craved now feeling like an interrogation lamp. He looked utterly broken, not by the loss of love, but by the public demolition of his ego and his judgment. He was exposed as a fool, a dupe, a man so blinded by his own vanity that he had nearly destroyed the empire she had helped him build. Her work was done. Without another word, Meredith Williams turned and walked calmly off the stage. She didn't look at Alistair, she didn't look at the shocked faces of the guests. She walked with her head held high, the red of her dress like a victor's flag, leaving behind the smoking crater of the life she had just obliterated, and the man who had so foolishly underestimated her. The silence held for a moment longer, and then the chaos began. The moment Meredith exited the ballroom, the vacuum of silence she left behind shattered into 1,000 shards of chaos. The initial collective shock of the city's elite gave way to a frenzied cacophony of gasps, frantic whispers, and the clicking of phone cameras capturing the scene. The string quartet had fallen silent, their bows hovering over their instruments in disbelief. Alistair stood stranded on the stage, the warm, adoring spotlight of a moment ago now a harsh, unforgiving glare exposing every twitch of his crumbling facade. His face, once a mask of smug triumph, had collapsed into a mess of confusion and abject horror. He looked out at the sea of faces that had been his loyal subjects, but now they stared back with the cold, morbid curiosity reserved for a public execution. Before he could even process what had happened, Mr. Harrison, his face a granite mask of cold fury, was on the stage, flanked by two other powerful board members. Alistair Harrison's voice was a low, dangerous growl barely audible above the din, but carrying the weight of absolute authority. "You have 5 seconds to get off this stage before I have security drag you off. You are a disgrace to this company and to everyone in this room." Alistair stammered his mind, unable to form a coherent defense. "Arthur, it's a misunderstanding. My wife, she's unwell. The only thing unwell here is your catastrophic judgment." Another board member hissed, his face white with rage. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" The party was over, as Alistair was escorted off the stage like a common criminal. The room erupted. Journalists smelling the biggest corporate scandal of the year were already tapping furiously into their phones, their expressions alight with savage glee. The story was too perfect, too dramatic. By the time Meredith reached the hotel lobby, her phone buzzed with the first breaking news alert. The headline, a brutal summary of her actions. "Wife accuses Williams. Innovations. CEO's mistress of fraud in shocking gala takedown." Meredith walked through the opulent lobby, a woman in a blood-red dress moving like a phantom through the wreckage of her own life. She ignored the stunned stares of the hotel staff and the guests who recognized her. The adrenaline that had carried her through the speech was beginning to fade, leaving a profound, bone-deep exhaustion in its wake. She felt strangely detached, as if she had just watched a film of someone else's life. In the quiet sanctuary of the hotel suite Chloe had booked for her, she finally let her composure falter. She didn't cry. Instead, she walked to the full-length mirror and stared at her reflection. She saw the woman in the Valentino gown, her makeup still perfect, her expression a mixture of steel and sorrow. It was the face of a warrior who had won a terrible, necessary war. She had cauterized a wound, but the burn was deep, and the scars would remain. Chloe called her voice a lifeline of frantic concern and fierce pride. "I saw the news alerts. Meredith, are you okay? What you did, it was legendary." "I'm not sure what I am," Meredith whispered, sinking onto the edge of the bed. "But I'm free." The next morning, the fallout was apocalyptic. The story was on the front page of every major newspaper and was the leading segment on every financial news network. Williams Innovations. A darling of the tech world was now a toxic asset. When the market opened, their stock plummeted by a staggering 30%, wiping out billions in value in a matter of minutes. The board convened an emergency meeting at dawn. The atmosphere was grim. They weren't just dealing with a PR nightmare. They were facing a potential corporate catastrophe. The audit had already begun a frantic search to discover what, if anything, Catherine O'Malley had stolen. Every investor, every partner, every employee was now looking at them, demanding answers. Alistair was not invited. He was the subject of the inquisition. Meanwhile, Catherine O'Malley had vanished, as if she'd never existed. When authorities, spurred by a formal complaint from the Williams board, Arrived at the Knightsbridge apartment, it was all but empty. A few designer clothes were left behind, along with a broken champagne flute on the counter. She had been a ghost ready to disappear the moment her cover was blown. An international arrest warrant was issued, connecting her to the reopened fraud case in Miami. She was gone, leaving Alistair to face the inferno alone. Alistair, locked in the cavernous, silent Mayfair house, was in a self-made hell. The home that had been his palace now felt like a tomb. Meredith's presence was gone, but her absence was a deafening roar in every room. On the cold marble of the hall table, a single crisp envelope waited for him. Inside were divorce papers already signed by Meredith, her signature a clean, decisive stroke. Tucked behind them was the business card of her lawyer, a woman renowned for dismantling the careers of arrogant, powerful men. His phone rang incessantly, a chorus of fury from investors and lawyers. He ignored them and tried to call Meredith, his desperation curdling into rage. He left a string of rambling, pathetic voicemails, each one a testament to his complete lack of self-awareness. Meredith, you've destroyed me. You've destroyed everything. Was this worth it to make a scene? We could have handled this privately. You've cost us billions. You owe me an explanation. Call me back. We need to present a united front to the board. Meredith, call me. He still didn't understand. He saw her actions not as a necessary defense of the company, but as a personal attack on him. He wasn't mourning the loss of his wife. He was mourning the loss of his reflection in the public eye. Late that afternoon, as the company's stock continued to bleed, Meredith received a call. It was Mr. Harrison. Meredith, he said, his voice heavy, not with anger, but with a weary respect. On behalf of the board, we owe you an apology. We were all blinded by Alistair's charisma. We enabled his ego, and we failed to see the rot setting in. You were the only one who saw the truth, and you had the courage to act on it. I only did what was necessary to protect my investment and the work of our employees. She replied, her voice calm and measured. The board has voted unanimously, he continued, getting to the point. Alistair has been suspended indefinitely as CEO pending the results of the full investigation. We're exercising the morality clause in his contract. His judgment cannot be trusted. Meredith, the company is hemorrhaging. We need a leader who can stop the bleeding and restore faith immediately. We need an interim CEO. He paused, the weight of his next words hanging in the balance. The board was unanimous on this as well. We want you, Meredith. The proposition struck her with the force of a physical blow. She stared out her hotel window, her mind reeling. She had planned for a quiet exit, a new life built from the ashes. She had never imagined a path back to the heart of the empire she had been pushed out of. Me, she finally managed to say the word, a whisper. You were the co-founder in spirit, if not on paper, Mr. Harrison said firmly. You have the institutional knowledge that no one else does. You have the respect of the original team. Your actions at the gala, while unorthodox, proved you have an iron will and an unshakable integrity that this company desperately needs right now. You are the only person who can restore faith in Williams' innovations. The only person we trust. Will you do it? Meredith looked out at the city spreading before her. For years she had been a queen in exile, watching the kingdom she built being tarnished by a vain and foolish king. This was not just a job offer. It was a restoration. It was a chance to reclaim her legacy, not as Alistair Williams's quiet wife, but as herself, A sense of purpose, clear and powerful, cut through her exhaustion. "Yes, Mr. Harrison," she said, and her own voice surprised her with its strength. "Yes, I will." A month later, the name on the CEO's office at Williams Innovations had been changed. The polished brass plate now read, Meredith Williams. Her first day walking back through the gleaming glass doors of the headquarters was a study in contrasts. The building was the same monument to success she had helped envision, but she entered it as a different woman. She was no longer a shadow, a visitor, or an accessory on Alistair's arm. She was the commander, and the quiet authority in her stride turned heads. Whispers followed her, not of scandal but of awe. The older employees, the engineers and programmers who remembered her from the grueling startup days, saw her return as a course correction. A young software developer, who had only ever known her as the CEO's quiet wife from company photos, held a door for her, his eyes wide with a newfound respect. It was a small gesture, but it was everything. Her true test came in the boardroom. The long, imposing table was filled with the same powerful figures who had watched her public humiliation, their faces a mixture of curiosity, skepticism, and hope. Mr. Harrison gave her a supportive nod, but the others were waiting to be convinced. They saw the woman who had courageously exposed a criminal, but they were yet to see the leader who could steer a multi-billion-dollar company out of a nosedive. Meredith didn't begin with platitudes or apologies for the recent drama. She began with a plan. She stood at the head of the table, calm and composed, and presented a clear, incisive 90-day strategy. She outlined vulnerabilities in their cybersecurity, overlooked by an ego-driven focus on product launches, and detailed a plan to overhaul them immediately. She identified an innovative clean energy project, one she had championed years ago, before Alistair had shelved it as not glamorous enough, and laid out a revived, fast-tracked development schedule. For the last 2 years, she said, her voice even and steady, "This company has been chasing the spotlight. We've prioritized perception over performance. That ends today. Our foundation is brilliant engineering and unshakable integrity. We will return to that. We will innovate not for headlines, but for genuine progress. We will be a company of substance again." She answered their questions with data and logic, her deep intrinsic knowledge of the company shining through. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. By the end of the meeting, the skepticism in the room had evaporated, replaced by a palpable sense of confidence. She hadn't just taken Alistair's chair. She had earned it. In the weeks that followed, Meredith moved with a purpose that energized the entire organization. Freed from the oppressive weight of Alistair's ego, she flourished. She was decisive, innovative, and empathetic. The press, which had feasted on the scandal, now had a new narrative, the scorned wife rising from the ashes to save the empire. Meredith, who had always shunned the spotlight, now used it with surgical precision. She gave one in-depth interview to a respected financial journal, where she laid out her strategic vision for the company's future. She was poised, brilliant, and utterly in command. The stock, which had been in free fall, stabilized and began a slow, steady climb. The divorce was handled with the same cool efficiency. Her lawyer, a woman known for her aggressive tactics, was surprised by Meredith's instructions. She didn't want to punish Alistair financially. She wanted to sever the ties cleanly and irrevocably. She took what was rightfully hers, a significant share of the company she had co-founded, in all but name, and relinquished any claim on his personal assets. It wasn't about revenge. It was about freedom. Alistair was a ghost of a past life, and she was closing the door on him forever. He became a pariah in the city that once worshipped him. His reputation was gone, His social invitations dried up, and his calls to former colleagues went unanswered. He was left with his money, but stripped of the adoration he craved. He was a king with no kingdom. He was forced to resign permanently from all his positions, a man rendered irrelevant by his own hubris. One evening, about 2 months into her tenure, Meredith was working late in her office. She had redecorated it completely, replacing Alistair's ostentatious mahogany and leather with calming shades of blue, cool grey and minimalist art. It was her space now, a sanctuary of focus and clarity. Her assistant's voice came through the intercom, hesitant. "Ma'am, there's an Alistair Williams here to see you. He doesn't have an appointment." A deep stillness settled over Meredith. She felt no fear, no anger, only the quiet finality of a chapter about to be closed. "Send him in." The man who walked through the door was a stranger in a familiar suit. It was tailored and expensive, but it seemed to hang off his frame. The arrogant swagger was gone, replaced by a weary, defeated slump. His eyes, which once scanned every room for admirers, were now fixed on the floor. "Meredith," he began, his voice raspy and thin. "Alistair." She replied, her tone neutral, not rising from her chair. She was behind her desk, a barrier of glass and steel between her present and her past. I'm not here to ask for anything," he stammered, finally looking at her. His eyes were hollow. I had to say it. I'm sorry. For everything. I was a fool, a blind, arrogant fool. I let it all go to my head, and I threw away the most important thing in my life. You. Meredith listened in silence, observing him with a detached sort of pity. He looked like a man who had finally read the last page of a book, only to realize he had misunderstood the entire story. He still thought he was the protagonist. He took a step closer. "I see what you're doing with the company. The clean energy project. It's brilliant. It was always brilliant. I just couldn't see it. I couldn't see you." She finally spoke, her voice soft, but unbreakable. "Do you know what I regret most, Alistair?" He looked at her, a flicker of hope in his eyes, perhaps expecting a confession of lingering love. "It isn't your affair. That was just a symptom of the real disease. I regret allowing you to make me feel small. I regret the thousands of times I quieted my own ideas so your voice could be louder. I regret fading into the background so your light could shine brighter, convincing myself it was a wife's duty. I regret sacrificing my own voice for the sake of your comfort, piece by piece, until I almost forgot I had one." She stood then, a queen in her own right, her presence filling the space he had once dominated. "That is a mistake I will never make again. What you did with Catherine was a betrayal of our marriage. But what I allowed you to do to me over the years was a betrayal of myself. Your apology is for the first act. My new life is the answer to the second." The hope in his eyes died, replaced by a stark, painful understanding. He had not just lost a wife. He had lost the architect of his entire world, a woman whose true value he was only now capable of seeing. "I accept your apology, Alistair," she concluded, her voice softening slightly, not with affection but with finality. "But it changes nothing. There is no going back. I have work to do, building this company into what it was always supposed to be. I wish you well in finding your own way." With a final defeated nod, he turned and walked out of the office, the door clicking softly shut behind him, closing on a decade of their life together. Meredith didn't watch him go. She turned to the vast window, looking out at the glittering cityscape. The lights of London twinkled back at her, no longer a symbol of her isolation, but a reflection of her own brilliance. The fire she had walked through had burned away the gilded cage, and, from the ashes, she had been reborn. Not as Mrs. Alistair Williams, the quiet wife, but as Meredith Williams, the woman who had saved them all. And her work was just beginning. What a journey of betrayal, humiliation, and ultimate vindication. Meredith's story is a powerful reminder that true strength isn't about being the loudest person in the room, but about having the courage to speak the truth when it matters most. She transformed her deepest pain into her greatest victory, not through revenge, but through reclaiming her own power and identity. Her story shows that underestimating the quiet ones is a mistake that can bring down empires. If you were moved by Meredith's incredible transformation from a forgotten wife to a powerhouse CEO, please show your support. Hit that like button to let us know you enjoyed the story, and share it with someone who loves a tale of justice and empowerment. And if you haven't already, make sure you subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you never miss another story of karma resilience and the incredible strength of the human spirit. Thank you for listening.